Hello, crypto world. Welcome to the Chart Historian. My name is Justin, and on this channel, I delve deep into crypto charts, exploring chart structures, fractals, and patterns. This is going to be an XRP video, and my oh my, what a busy past few days this has been. This was supposed to be Uptober, and apparently it's not turning out to be that way. The SEC just recently notified the world that they were going to appeal the ruling, so we get this nice drop on the XRP chart. So in this video, I want to talk about how does this affect the overall structure. I'll talk about the macro structure. Does this drop change that macro structure? What is going on? Well, I made a short where I talked about how I wanted XRP to hold a certain line. I'll show you that line. So it was this line, and lo and behold, within a couple hours, it was, or at least it seemed that quick, it was through this line. Now, there is another line, this line right here, that it has also gone below, but it is now trying to get above it at this point in time. Now, I'm not someone who usually draws trend lines. For those of you who follow this channel, you're most likely aware of that. Let me remove these. So how does this change the equation with the SEC's announcement? Is this altering the structure? What is taking place on this chart? Well, let's zoom out and review the big picture, the macro repetitive structure that I believe XRP has. Okay, so here we are on a day candle. This is a zoomed out picture of the XRP chart. All these boxes and letters, it may look like gobbledygook to you. For those of you who follow this channel, you're aware of what this is. For those of you who are new, I'll briefly catch you up to date. So it is my belief that XRP has a repetitive macro structure. This is the centerpiece of my technical analysis. It is so important that I talk about this repetitive macro structure every single XRP video. So let's dive into what this repetitive structure has. Now, there are three main parts to it. There is the bull run, which we see one here. We see another one over here. We see another one over here. If we go further back in time, we'll see other bull runs. Notice how they're all different sizes. That's because when a fractal repeats, the timing, the height, and the depth, those do not copy over. The main idea copies over, but how it materializes will be unique. So the timing will be different. The height will be different, as we see with all of these bull run structures, and the depth will be different. So it's the same idea playing out, but it looks different every single time. So after the bull run comes a decline. We see one here, we see one here, we see one here. If we go further back in time and examine the bull runs that came over here on this part of the chart, it would be the same thing, a bull run followed by a decline. After this decline comes a sideways range-bound time. We see one here, we see one here, we see one here. We are currently working our way through one over here. Now, this sideways time is a repetitive structure. And just like the bull run, where the timing, height, and depth is different, the same applies to all parts of this macro structure. This is true of this sideways range-bound time. Now, this sideways range-bound time, I split it up into three separate fractals, so mainly we can easily track where we are, but it also serves as a good way to show you how it's a repetitive structure. So in fractal 1, we have two parts, part A and B. Part A, price moves up, it moves back down again, and then in part B, it goes flat. Sometimes part B arches down. We see that once again repeat over here in part A, where price moves up, it moves down, and it went flat. In fractal 2, there are three waves, wave A, wave B, and wave C. We see that once again repeat over here with wave A, wave B, and wave C. In fractal 3, this is the most challenging of all fractals to track, and I'll explain why in a minute, but what it does is it moves up to part A, which is the peak of this fractal, and then crashes or declines depending on how severe the decline is. This low is part B. After this low, it recovers, does a smaller correction, and then it goes into the bull run. So over here, we have part A where it moves up to a peak. It then has declined. This one was not a crash. To a low, which was part B. and it has since then recovered, and it is my belief that we are most likely in the small correction. So why did I say this one is the most challenging one or the hardest one to track? And that is because it's really a vague fractal. So look at the differences between these two. They repeat the same functions. So they move up to a peak, which is part A. Look how long this one took to reach that peak. Look how short this one took to reach that peak. Look how quick and fast this decline was to reach a low, or it's not always the low of the fractal, but it's the low after part A. So this took place in a very short amount of time, whereas this one was just a slow grind down. And as this has played out, when it dropped here, I thought, well, this could be part B starting to move up. That makes sense. This is the recovery after the low, and this would be the small correction. But then it continued to go lower. So at that point, I have to say, no. This is playing out on a larger scale. So this, as of now, is the low. This is the high. This is part A. This is part B. We have recovered off the low. We are currently, what I believe, in the small correction. Now, what I do in most of my videos, I compare this third range-bound fractal to other third range-bound fractals. And this is a nice way to show the similarities to the past and what could potentially be at play. However, it comes with certain inherent pitfalls, and that is you can easily kind of attach yourself to a certain fractal from the past, and then it deviates. What we know from this chart is that every single time any of these fractals repeat, the functions are the same, but the way it looks, the way it materializes, is always going to be unique. So the inherent pitfall of comparing to the past is that we latch on to a certain fractal from the past, and then at some point it breaks and deviates, and it's like, oh my gosh, what's it doing? This is terrible. The world is falling apart. But really, all it's doing is just fulfilling the same set of functions, just in a unique way, and that's what it has always done. So, having said that, let's dive into the past and examine some other third range-bound fractals and see how today's chart measures up to those. We'll see how it may be similar and how it's different. We are going to examine this third range-bound fractal. Let's zoom into this part right here. Okay, so this whole repetitive sequence starts in 2014 with a bull run. This is a structure that repeats. You know, this bull run structure, I deep dive in a series of videos on my Patreon page. You're welcome to join that Patreon. It's a $5 a month subscription. This bull run structure is a repetitive structure. It is worth being familiar with it once it starts to come into play. So we have the bull run, we have the decline, and then we have the sideways range-bound time. Here in Fractal 1, price moves up. In Part A, it moves back down again. And then in Part B, it arches down. In Fractal 2, we have the three waves, wave A, wave B, and wave C. In Fractal 3, we have the move up to the peak, which is Part A. We have the decline, which is Part B. We have the recovery, and then the small correction, and then it goes into the bull run. So I want to take this fractal and copy and paste it and compare it to today's third range-bound fractal. Okay, so here is this fractal. The gray fractal is essentially this fractal just stretched to match today's timing. In my past several XRP videos, I've compared this fractal in this manner. So that is just one brief way to examine it. We can go further. We can split it up into smaller sections. So I take this blue box right here, which is the beginning part of the fractal, the part that moves up to Part A, and I compare it to today's move up to Part A. So we see some similarities. It starts off going flat. The fractal has that. So this blue fractal is this, just adjusted to better match this part of the fractal. So today's peak was right here, whereas in this fractal, this peak takes place over here, so over here. Although it's different that you could see the commonalities at play. After that, we have this section of the fractal, which is the decline. And once again, we have a lot of commonality. This one on today's chart played out on a smaller time frame than it did, or at least took a smaller amount of the overall fractal, a smaller percentage of the overall fractal to accomplish this decline than it originally did. But what I like about this, we even have a lot of, like, this dip that took place harkens back to the dip that took place, this dip, in 2017. So we have some crazy similarities. So once it comes to a low, which is part B, same with this structure, it then begins to move up. So in 2017, this was a bottoming out structure, this part. However, on today's chart, it has moved up substantially. In fact, it's moved up into what historically is the zone, which is kind of the upper part of the fractal where the small correction takes place. So this kind of leads me to believe that this on today's chart is the small correction, whereas originally that small correction was over here, which would be this or this. Now, let's play the devil's advocate. It is possible we are still doing this bottoming out structure, and at some point it will move up and do some small correction like this. It may not happen here. It could happen here. It could be further up. I don't think so, just because historically, and I go into this in other videos, the range where this small correction, what I believe is the small correction right now, is taking place is the traditional point at where it normally takes place for this fractal. Okay, so what is going on here? So clearly there is some sort of deviation taking place on today's chart. For those of you who've been following me cover this fractal, this may sound terrible. Oh my God, is the world falling apart? Not really. I want to show you another fractal that I have compared to in the past, but I thought it had deviated away. But the other day I took a look at it with a set of fresh eyes and I was like, oh my goodness. Let me show you what that is. So if we were to compare this third range-bound fractal to today's chart, let's do that. We can see that there are differences and similarities. Now, I have had it laid out slightly different. In my previous videos, I had it laid out more along this, and it made sense at the time because this part wasn't printed, and this actually matched up fairly well with today's chart. However, as it has continued to play out, I have realized that there actually is some similarity going on today's chart. So if this is at play, and once again, I can't be 100% sure, all I'm doing is finding similarities to the past. So we have this part right here, which would be, in essence, this. Let me zoom in a little. So we have this first bounce, which would be this. It then moves up into this next wave, which would be this wave. And then finally, we have this third wave right here. This third wave includes a sharp decline, which we see taking place on today's chart. But what comes next? Well, we begin to move up, and at this point, it goes into the bull run. Okay, so this is a 4-hour candle. We can see the similarities in a little higher definition. This moves up, this pulls back, both on the fractal and the chart. It moves back up again. It doesn't do this thing, it declines. It does this wave, and then this kind of peak, and then this sharp decline. Whether it is this structure at play or this structure at play, and this is just a deviation, we are close to the bull run. So this is one more third range-bound fractal I want to look at. Let's zoom in. So here's the bull run, here's the decline, here's the first fractal. It moves up, pulls back. This one arches down in part B. In fractal 2, there's 3 waves. This is a very unique looking 3 waves. Wave A, which is very large. Wave B, which is tiny. It's more noted by the dips on either side of the wave. And then finally, there's wave C. In fractal 3, price moves up to a peak. It then declines. It then recovers, does that small correction, and then goes into the bull run. Look how this small correction dips low before going into the bull run. I find this structure similar to today's dip low on the end of, or at least what I believe is near the end of this third range-bound fractal. So to conclude this analysis, this announcement by the SEC, in my humble opinion, does not alter anything. It just chose to express a different third range-bound fractal with this decline that we just looked at. That wasn't part of this fractal, but it doesn't change anything in the long run. We are still at the same point where we were a week ago, pretty much. It's just going slow. At some point, like I told you in my last video, a breakout is going to occur. I don't know when that will happen, but I do know that we're close to it. So I don't find what's taking place on today's chart anything of substance. Now, maybe it will drop lower. We got to be open to stuff like that taking place. Remember, it's going to play out uniquely every single time. So don't marry yourself to any one of these fractals. Just use them as a basic guide. Don't put too much emphasis on any one. But what we can be more confident in is that we are in the third range-bound fractal, that we are near the end, likely, of this third range-bound fractal. So far, we have the low, and we are recovering. Until something gets printed that makes me believe that we are further behind in this third range-bound fractal, I will continue to conclude that we are likely very near the bull run. So October may end up, in the end, being Uptober. We'll have to see how that plays out. One last thing to look at. So this is the XRP dominance chart. I've done a video on this. You can watch it over here. It is my belief that this has a repetitive structure. We have completed the declining part of this structure, and we are now beginning on the move up. So this is pointing further in the direction that we are indeed close to the bull run. I believe we have exciting days ahead. If you enjoyed this video, it'd be much appreciated if you hit that thumbs up button. This is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. If you enjoyed this video and you're not yet a subscriber, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. I'll continue to follow up on this chart as it continues to develop. I'll also include the link to my Patreon, and attached to that Patreon is a Discord where we discuss XRP and other cryptos. You're welcome to join. It's a $5 a month subscription. I'm so glad you caught this video. I hope you catch my next one. Have a great day, and bye for now.